We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
Okay, this is from Grammarist, okay?
Yeah.
Scuttlebutt. The barrel containing the fresh drinking water was called a scuttlebutt and became a place for sailors to gather, talk, and pass on information. The term scuttlebutt became synonymous with information. Whoa, that's like water cooler talk. That's the same thing. In like an office, you'd have like water cooler chat.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool. I didn't know that. Okay, well, I don't know how true this is. This is crazy. Hunky-dory?
Okay.
Hunky-dory is an abbreviated version of a street name in Japan, known for the services provided to the sailors who visited there. It is meant to mean all is well or perfect.
Hunky-dory.
I don't know.
That's got to be like the Anglicanization
I think
of
it's
whatever
like
that Japanese street was.
Deep bastardization of whatever that street was actually called. But yeah. And this is Grammarist.com, so I mean, you know, I'm going to take their word for it, I guess. It doesn't sound, I mean, it actually kind of sounds Japanese in a way, so it makes sense. Like, they, you know, hunky-dory makes absolutely no sense in English, so.
There's a lot of English phrases and slang that make absolutely no sense, though.
Yeah, that's Shakespeare's fault.
It kind of is Shakespeare's fault.
Yeah.
What else do you have? Give me another one.
Okay.
Give me something that's actually nautical.
Land ho. To call out land ho was to let the crew know land had been spotted. It is a way to let everyone know that the end of a voyage is imminent.
I don't think that they would say land ho.
They wouldn't?
No, it's land ho. Not that's there's no comma in between. You're not addressing a ho and saying there's land.
Well, in my world, that's how you say it. I mean, I got so many more. I can pepper in this. I can pepper in.
I think you should do it. Throughout.
I'm gonna do it.
Yeah. There'll be a lot of opportunities, I think.
Yeah, you got it.
We're gonna talk a lot about sailing.
Yay! I don't know. What's a good sea shanty song? What you do with a drunken sailor? What you do with a drunken sailor? I love that. I love that. I was just at an Irish pub this weekend. They were playing Irish music and it was really cool. And it made me feel like I was on the ocean. I was on the ocean. I was on a ship.
What do you do with a drunken sailor?
Early in the morning, they tell you what you do. Like you do something with him.
Yeah, there's always a thing, but I don't remember what any of the things are.
I don't understand.
And
yeah. Hit him in the head with a rusty pipe or something like that. I don't know. I have no idea. I can't remember. Anyway, we're slaying monsters. Across the table, we've got Matt.
Arr.
Arr. And I'm EJ. With my peg leg. And my eye patch.
I really, really want to do something with pirates. I haven't figured out what I can do that's in the right vein yet, but there's a lot of like pirate stories and stuff like that. But this will scratch that itch a little bit, I think. Yeah.
Maybe you could do like the Leviathan.
I'm not going to officially do the Leviathan in this, but we're going to talk a lot about sea monsters.
Okay, there you go then.
So we're going to kind of get there, I think. Mm-hmm. Because today, EJ, do you know what we're going to talk about?
We're going to talk about the U-boat.
Yes, the U-boat. We are going to talk about two very distinct instances where German U-boats in World War I were sunk by sea monsters.
Yay, sea monsters!
It's going to be super cool.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Exciting.
This is one of those really bizarre little like niche times where you see, I wouldn't even call it a cryptid flap. Like it was twice, but there are two times, and it's weird enough. One U-boat being sunk by a sea monster is a strange enough occurrence on its own, but to have two happen and to not really have any allied ships be sunk by these sea monsters is very bizarre in the like scope of history.
So the sea monsters were working for the Americans.
I mean, apparently, yeah.
Wow. And I mean, I have read some of these accounts and they seem to be like, I mean, it could be, but it doesn't seem to be like an American ship attacking a U-boat because the sailors had eyewitness accounts of something.
Yes.
And so if they didn't have the eyewitness accounts, I'd be like, oh, well, it's just like somebody making something up.
Right.
But we have all these accounts of these weird things happening.
Yes.
So it makes you wonder.
It seems more than just there are these sea stories. Mm-hmm. You know, you hear all of the old nautical tales and you can just imagine the like dark seaside bars of these places and the old like rough bearded guy played by, Matthew McConaughey in the corner is like, yeah, I saw a monster out there once.
Yeah.
It came real close to the ship. I could smell its breath. Like that sort of character. And those stories are everywhere in nautical history. Mm-hmm. And we don't put a whole lot of credence on them because, they're just old sailors telling stories. A lot of times it's like to rile up the young guys or whatever. It's kind of akin to the fisherman's story of you're like, oh man, I almost had this fish. It was so big, that sort of thing. But this is an instance where we know that the boats went down. We know that the crew is actually reporting these things, and when they are brought in front of tribunals or whatever, they talk about the monster. So, or at least allegedly they do, right?
Yeah, there's documentation on that.
Yeah, it's really a little fascinating thing. And so we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the place of these types of tales in nautical history. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to put forth a theory that I don't think anyone has really thought about before.
Yay!
That should be pretty cool.
Ooh, you've heard it here, folks.
For the first time, I think. We'll see. So.
Scuttlebutt.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some good scuttlebutt.
Yeah.
Ew.
Ew. It does sound kind of gross. Ew.
So, during World War I, a new kind of naval warfare emerged, the submarine. Over the course of the German U-boat campaign in the British Isles and the Mediterranean, more than 200 submarines were lost. While most of these were the result of attacks or accidents, 2 of the subs disappeared under more mysterious circumstances. According to legend, they were destroyed by massive sea monsters. The truth and legend behind the claims of monster attacks offers a fascinating insight into the war, the captains and their crew, and the lore and mythology of the sea itself. And they will be our subject for the next 2 episodes. Now, for this episode specifically, I'll be using a whole bunch of historical sources. Olaus Magnus's History of the Northern Peoples, Eric Pontoppidan's, or Pontoppidan?
Oh boy.
I think it's Eric Pontoppidan. Eric Pontoppidan's Natural History of Norway, Henry Lee's Octopus, or the Devilfish of Fact and Fiction. I'll also be using Gary J. Galbraith's article, The 1848 Enormous Serpent of the Daedalus Identified, from the Skeptical Inquirer, and Dwight R. Messimer's seminal Verschollen World War I U-boat Losses. Which is just one of those books that you can... It's a very Mark Corrigan book. Mark Corrigan from Peep Show. It's the kind of thing that he would just love and read cover to cover over and over again. And it's because it is literally, there's no excitement in it at all. There's no story. There's no character. It's literally just the history of all the subs in World War I.
What does Verschollen mean?
I believe Verschollen means sunk or lost. Let me find out. Let me find out if I'm right. Lost. Verschollen.
Verschollen. Wow. Okay.
As long as humans have sailed the seas, they've been fascinated by the creatures living beneath the waters. Stories of sea serpents and monsters are probably as old as the invention of the boat itself. We already talked about the Hafgulfa, that giant monster that feeds with its mouth at water level. It would like hover at water level and everything would come into its mouth and then it would gulp everything down. You remember this story?
Yeah, it's not nearly as bad as a full gulfer. God. Or maybe when it eats, it becomes the full gulfer and then it's okay and then it's good.
Up until then, it's just the half gulfer.
Right.
Ugh.
I had to do it, I'm sorry.
These stories seem to be based on real animal behavior. Whales employing a tactic called trap feeding, where they belch chum to the surface. They regurgitate, and then it floats on the surface, and they wait with their open mouths while prey comes to eat their chum, and then they swallow their prey whole. But let's talk about some specific instances of sea monster sightings and attacks throughout history. You can't talk about sea serpents without talking about the Vikings and Norse legends, of course.
Yeah.
Way back in the 1550s, Swedish writer and cartographer Olaus Magnus chronicled the myths and histories of the Scandinavian sailors in his tome, A Description of the Northern Peoples. This was a comically large series of texts that served as a very deep and expansive repository for all the legends of Scandinavian myth. It was the first time anyone had actually written them down.
Well, there's a lot of Scandinavian myths, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
It should be a huge book.
The 21st book in the series.
Oh, many books.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
the 21st book in the series. It was like an encyclopedia, kind of.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So the 21st book was titled Of Monstrous Fishes, and it detailed what Magnus called the sea orm. And he wrote, "They who in works of navigation on the coasts of Norway employ themselves in fishing or merchandise do all agree in this strange story, that there is a serpent there which is of vast magnitude, namely 200 foot long and more, over 20 feet thick, and is wont to live in the rocks and caves toward the sea coast about Burge." That's a place, Burge. "Which will go alone from his holes in a clear night in summer and devour calves, lambs, and hogs. Or else he goes into the sea to feed on polyps," that's an octopus, "locust," that's a lobster, "and all sorts of sea crabs. He hath commonly hair hanging from his neck a cubit long, and sharp scales, and is black, and he hath flaming shining eyes."
Well, this just sounds completely made up, but
There again, this could very well just be the Scandinavian sailors being like, let's tell them about a big snake in the ocean.
Yeah.
But I think there probably was some truth to this in what they thought they saw.
maybe, and it could just be like a warning, like, don't come over here.
Could be, yeah.
Could be to keep people away from certain areas for certain financial reasons, or to keep kids away from the edges of the sea.
Absolutely could be, yeah. According to Magnus, or at least the woodcut paintings inspired by his work, these sea orms had a habit of attacking ships and encircling them with their bodies and devouring the unfortunate sailors whole. In addition to his serpents, Magnus also included a woodcut of a pair of giant lobsters attacking a hapless boat. Now, 200 years later, the Bishop of Bergen, Erik Pontoppidan, took a critical look at Magnus's reports. Coming at the whole thing with a, for the time, healthy dose of skepticism, Pontoppidan dove into the question of sea monsters in his Natural History of Norway in 1753. While he accused Magnus of, quote, mixing myths and fables with real accounts, he did find quite a few that, to him, defied comprehension. In one, Norwegian captain Lawrence de Ferry reported a massive sea serpent sighted in August of 1746. After hearing a commotion among the men at the oars, he joined them on the deck, and they pointed out a sea serpent swimming alongside the ship. And Captain de Ferry wrote this: "In the meantime, the sea snake passed by us, and we were obliged to tack the vessel about in order to get nearer to it. As the snake swam faster than we could row, I took my gun that was ready charged and fired at it. On this, he immediately plunged into the water." They rowed to the spot where the serpent submerged, but found no trace of blood in the water.
Why is our solution to always just shoot things?
I don't know. It's just what they did.
It's so weird.
This is the Frank Reynolds thing again. You're like, anyway, I started blasting.
Exactly.
Just shoot it.
It's your number one go-to thing.
Yeah. It wasn't aggressive to them. It was just swimming beside them, and he was like, let's shoot it.
Exactly. I always hear this shit with these stories. It's like this thing came up out of the water and looked at us, so I shot its head off.
I mean, I guess I take a little comfort in the fact that this was not an American who did this solution, because I feel like that is generally the American solution to things. That's strange. Shoot it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Captain DeFerry goes on to describe the monster. The head of a snake, which it held more than 2 feet above the surface of the water and resembled that of a horse. It was of a grayish color, and the mouth was quite black and very large. It had black eyes and a long white mane that hung down from the neck to the surface of the water. Besides the head and neck, we saw 7 or 8 folds or coils of the snake, which were very thick, and as far as we could guess, there was about a fathom distance between each fold. This would essentially be like the humps that we see in modern sea serpents. Now, he says that there is a fathom distance between each fold, and a fathom, do you know how much a fathom is? How far?
No.
It's about 6 feet.
Oh, okay.
Little bit under 2 meters, and we would say that it's about 1 Aaron Rodgers.
1 Aaron Rodgers. Okay,
Yeah.
but still shorter than a Roethlisberger.
Still shorter than a Roethlisberger. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. It's no surprise that these many humped sea serpents found their way into mythology during the Age of the Sail. Bishop Pontoppidan shared stories from nameless, quote, North traders who told him, "The sea snake has raised itself up and thrown itself across a boat, and sometimes even across a vessel of some 100 tons burden, and by its weight has sunk it down to the bottom." Imagine this, like you see this sea serpent and it leaps on top of your boat and like throws itself on top, and you can't remove it from the deck, so it just drags you underneath.
I mean, what could this possibly be? It's interesting because these guys know what octopuses
Yes. Octopuses
look like. Mm-hmm. They know what all those things are, and yet we've got they're saying that they're giant sea serpents.
Yeah.
Interesting.
One of the aforesaid North traders, this is still quoting his book, one of the aforesaid North traders who says that he has been near enough to some of the sea snakes alive to feel their smooth skin, informs me sometimes they will raise their frightful heads and snap a man out of the boat. Now, the bishop, he's critical of these stories of man-eating snakes because he is, quote, not certain they are fish of prey. And he goes on to relate stories of sea serpents encircling ships. And what they would do is they would wrap their coils not over top of the ship, but around the ship. So you couldn't sail away. So they trapped you in this little area. And with you now immobilized, it would just start picking people off the deck and snapping them up.
I think they're rabid dolphins.
I don't think dolphins get rabies, for the record.
Well, they do in my head. They
Okay.
This is a rabid dolphin situation.
Rabid dolphin.
Yep.
So that's your go-to theory of what all this is?
Yeah, they're surrounding the boat.
Yep.
And they look like a big snake when they're together.
Sure.
And then these 2 dolphins, they work as a team, latched onto each other to look like a snake and attack people so that people don't go after dolphins, they go after snakes. Okay, rabid dolphins.
Rabid dolphins.
Yep.
Always the culprit.
Always.
Sea serpents weren't the only fearsome beast in Bishop Pontoppidan's questionable history book. He's often credited as the first person to write down the legend of the Kraken, the mythical giant squid and the big bad evil guy of the sea. The Kraken is, of course, better known for grabbing a hold of ships and just tearing them apart with its tentacles. We'll talk more about the Kraken some other day, because I feel like that deserves its own series altogether.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Bishop Pontoppidan doesn't really give an explanation for these. And from what I can gather from his book, he believes that there are at least some sea serpents living in the ocean.
Okay, so not like sea eels.
No.
But something else.
But actual sea serpents, yeah.
In the doldrums. You know what this is?
I do know what this is, but go ahead.
The doldrums are an area near the equator where very little surface wind is present. This created problems with ships dependent on the wind to fill their sails and being in the doldrums. Ah, I guess it means you're blue.
Yeah. Yeah, it means that you're sad.
Means that
but,
you're sad.
But it was when the wind would completely disappear and you wouldn't be able to sail.
Ah, like the Sargasso Sea.
Yeah. So 1848, the British frigate HMS Daedalus was sailing off the coast of Namibia when the crew sighted their own sea serpent. Traveling between 12 and 15 miles an hour, the creature passed by the ship, keeping its head and shoulders above the surface. Now, Captain McCahey described the sea serpent. The diameter of the serpent was about 15 or 16 inches behind the head, which was without any doubt that of a snake. And it was never during the 20 minutes it continued in sight of our glasses, once below the surface of the water. Its color dark brown and yellowish white about the throat. It had no fins, but something like a mane of a horse, or rather a bunch of seaweed washed along its back.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
And I love the specificity of the coloration.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeing something that is specific.
Definitely. Yeah. Now, although this serpent didn't act aggressively, it was a significant enough sighting to warrant an illustration. So Captain McCahey commissioned an artist to draw what he saw and sent his account and the illustration to the Lord Commissioners of the Admiralty. The Daedalus sighting made quite a splash.
Oh, very good, sir. Very good.
At the time, newspapers were common enough to keep everyone informed. Like they were starting to really become something that people paid attention to. And the Illustrated London News picked up the story and ran with it on October 28th, 1848, including that picture of the captain's illustration. And this started something of a media firestorm, thrusting sea monsters into the public eye. The fact that the whole thing was confirmed by a reputable captain for the Royal Navy gave this incident an air of authenticity. And for decades, the Daedalus' sighting became the gold standard for sea serpent accounts.
Are these all kind of seen in the same area, or are they?
No, they're all over the place.
All over the place, all over the world.
All over the place, all over the world.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a theory. We'll talk about it.
I know you do.
Soon.
I
But
know.
yeah, I have a theory. Between the ship-sinking krakens and the sea serpents, sailors had plenty to fear in an industry that was already so fraught with the dangers from elements, like, the elements that they're subjected to piracy, to maybe even their captain being overthrown and being marooned. But as the Enlightenment period grew, so did researchers' curiosity with the natural world. Now, during the 17th century, there was a push to try to separate folklore from truth and to start to classify the world in a more scientific way. This brings us to Henry Lee, a self-proclaimed, sometimes naturalist, who served as director for the Brighton Aquarium in the UK. Now, Lee was a skeptic when it came to the various reports of sea monsters, and he spent quite a bit of time throughout his career trying to determine what the sailors were actually seeing. In 1874, Lee published The Octopus, the devilfish of fiction and fact. In this book, he laid out his theory on the Kraken, that it was an existing giant octopus or squid. Calling them cuttles, Lee dove into the biology and habits of cephalopods. He explained that they are not the aggressive monsters of legend, throwing particular shade at Victor Hugo for his anti-octopus story, The Toilers of the Sea. Lee's book also includes a chapter on his personal interactions with octopi, in a chapter titled Octopods I Have Known, which just makes me think of him having like a My Dinner with Andre style conversation with an octopus before the two of them go their separate ways or whatever.
That's really adorable. This guy's really standing up for octopuses.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And they're very smart animals. So
They are.
honestly, like if you can talk to any animal, it'd probably be an octopus if they could do it.
Is it? Let me actually make sure it's... I think it is octopuses.
I think octopus is a Greek word, and therefore I think the plural is...
Both are acceptable plurals.
Ah. Is it a Greek word?
Of the two, octopuses is simpler and more commonly used. Yeah, ancient Greek. So, Lee became the first naturalist to give a real credence to these monster stories. This is like the dawn of biology. In the last chapter of his book, he talks about examining a 9-foot-long tentacle with 300 suckers and determining that it must have belonged to a colossal squid. And he said, I confess that until I saw and measured this enormous limb, I doubted the accuracy of some early observations, which this specimen alone would suffice to prove with confidence.
I mean, that's what I was thinking, is that it has to be an octopus.
And we know today that there are true giant squids and what we call colossal squids that do exist. Some of this was obviously based on fact. Lee expounded on this research in his 1883 book, Sea Monsters Unmasked. In this book, he takes the dubious position that sea serpents are misidentified giant and colossal squid tentacles. In Lee's mind, the cephalopods are just kind of hanging out around the water's surface and throwing their tentacles up in the air like they just don't care.
Oh, wow. I thought this book was about cephalopods that denied COVID to be a real thing. God, we got enough problems. Now we got to deal with COVID-denying cephalopods.
They just refuse to wear the masks. They always have them pulled down over their below their beaks.
Right, exactly. This is not how you do it, folks. Unbelievable.
Now, Lee believed that squid swimming on the surface accounted for the majority of sea serpent sightings. And he pointed to the cephalopoid's propulsion mechanism, which, do you know how they do this?
Actually, I've seen them swim.
Yeah, so they suck water into a tube in their bodies and then they shoot it back out. And that act of shooting drives themselves forward and pushes water out of them. And it allows them to like really smoothly glide through the water without needing fins or a tail the way a fish or a dolphin would.
I'm an idiot, but like, do we not have, why don't we have this? Why don't we use this? Why don't we use water propulsion units in submersibles?
I think there is water propulsion that's used in vehicles. Yeah.
Is there? Oh, okay. Okay. Hey, you know what? If any of our listeners know about this kind of technology, this extremely advanced technology that my dumbness does not understand, let us know about it.
Water-fueled car comes up on Wikipedia.
Oh, that's cool.
Is an automobile that hypothetically derives its energy directly from water. Oh, that's different, though. That's not the same thing. Using the actual... this is all like running on water instead of gasoline. No.
I want an octopus-like water-powered submersible. Why don't we have that?
I don't know.
Okay, maybe we do. What's our email address?
Oh, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com.
Okay, yes. If you're smart about the water, let us know. What do you think? Is there one? Does this exist?
I mean, it seems like it should. I do know, like water propulsion is totally a thing that has been used in different devices, but I don't know specifically what they are.
Yeah, me neither. Okay.
So the thing that Lee put together is that the way that cephalopods swim is very similar to the way that sea monsters are described to swim. Now, to Lee, the triangular body of squid, you know how they have kind of the smooth body and then the triangular type of like, they don't have a head exactly, but it's at the end, the opposite end of the tentacles. So that triangular part and became the head of the sea serpent, and then the tentacles became the tail. And since the sailors were only ever seeing the top half of the squid, meaning like half of the body and not the below portion, it could be conceivable that they were interpreting it as a single long creature rather than a body and then 8 or 10 legs at the end.
Makes sense.
So what do you think? Is that a plausible explanation for what they were seeing?
I do think so. I think it doesn't explain the mane that they're seeing. I guess it could be that the octopus is getting involved in some seaweed, But I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if it fully explains it.
Okay. Now, it's rare for giant squid to be found near the surface, but it's not impossible. And actually, in January of 2023, the AFP News posted a video of an 8-foot or 2.5 meter or 1.3 Rogers. So an 8-foot long squid that was swimming near the surface of Japan. In a more modern analysis of the Daedalus's sighting, the one with the mane, Gary J. Galbraith, writing for the Skeptical Inquirer, proposed a different theory. To Galbraith, the captain's report was more conducive with a whale skim feeding at the surface. We've talked before about whales' feeding methods. And in skim feeding, a whale travels along the surface of the water with its mouth open. And this allows water to pass through the whale's baleen, which is a filter contained in the whale's mouth. And the baleen filters out plankton and gives the whale its meal, essentially. It's trawling,
Basically,
if you think about it. Yeah, it's dragging a net or filter along the water and just gathering up all the tasty treats. So the idea that Galbraith puts forth is that that's what they are seeing. They're seeing the essentially top jaw of the whale, and that becomes the head, and then the backside of the whale becomes the body.
Like they're saying, a lot of them say that it looks like a horse head.
Yeah.
Does that even look? Could that possibly look like a horse head?
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. I'm going to show you a picture.
Okay. Oh. Oh, okay.
You don't realize that their mouths, the top of their mouths, look weird. And talk about the hair. Well, maybe you're just looking at it wrong.
Are they barnacles?
Could be barnacles. Yeah, it could be barnacles. But also the baleen looks like hair. From that, and this is just me. This is my kind of theory. But my theory is that the baleen is what actually resembles the hair. Here's a really good example of it. And that looks like the hair hanging down from the head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It really does look like hair.
Now, despite Henry Lee's efforts to demystify the kraken and giant cephalopods, they still made for great antagonists. Probably the most well-known depiction of a giant squid attack happens in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We all know this incident, right? It's where Captain Nemo and the Nautilus find themselves under siege by a school of squid. That story was first published in serial form before being collected in 1870 and translated to English in 1872. Jules Verne was, of course, French. The original translation was hilariously bad. Do you know anything about this?
No.
Oh, the original translation was terrible. It mistakenly called diving suits cork jackets, and even fucked up the title and called it 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas, which isn't that big of a deal. And then my favorite, the narrator, Louis Page Mercier, called the American Badlands the disagreeable territory of Nebraska.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I don't actually know if I should call that an error or just like literary brilliance.
Is that? I know. I honestly, like, if I was like, the Badlands are in Nebraska?
I guess so.
Right.
I think aren't the Badlands actually in Wyoming? I think the Badlands are in Wyoming.
I thought the Badlands were southwest.
No. Well, Badlands National Park is South Dakota.
Okay.
I suspect that the Badlands is colloquially used for just the American West in general.
Oh, okay. Well, if I was the mayor of Nebraska, I'd want that one. What is it?
The disagreeable territory.
The disagreeable territory. I'd want to name my town the disagreeable territory.
The disagreeable territory of Nebraska.
Yeah.
Do you know the Bruce Springsteen song?
Yeah.
The Badlands of Wyoming, I think, in that song. That's what he says.
Maybe it's a colloquial phrase.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a generic phrase for the American West.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the iconic like submarine versus giant squid is this. It's just this captivating thing in the public eye. Like you're so into it, right? Mm-hmm. It's such a great set piece because it takes man's technology and dunks it into the most dangerous place on Earth and puts it at the mercy of the ocean's most intimidating monster. And what's wild is that at the time, submarines, they weren't even that new of an invention. We're talking 1870s. We're not that new. You want to guess when the first submarine was designed?
Around the time of the American Revolution, I think.
You are off by like 200 years.
What?
Yeah, 1578.
Oh, wow.
1578 by a man named William Bourne. Now, it was made of wood, wrapped in waterproof leather, and submerged by filling bags along its side with water. It's essentially a primitive type of ballast. Whether or not that sub worked is a matter of entirely speculation because it doesn't seem like it ever actually got created and tested. It was just a theoretical idea that he came up with. Now, over the next couple of centuries, ship designers went through more iterations of this idea of sailing underwater. But the real power of submarines came into play, you're correct, during the Revolutionary War with the... Do you know what it was called?
I don't know.
It was not a fearsome name. It was called the Turtle.
Oh, the turtle. That's so cute. That tells you about the mentality back then. Now we're just like, we're like Operation Shock and Awe and like, you know, we're crazy now. And now it's just like the turtle. Yeah. And that's what helped win us our country. Cute little names like that. Did you know that Ben Franklin wanted it to be the turkey?
Wanted what to be the turkey?
The national bird. Our bird.
I did know that.
Not the eagle, but the turkey.
The turkey.
And we didn't, I guess it wasn't fierce enough.
I feel like in the branching timelines of the United States history, right, in the multiverse, the branch where we agree and the turkey is our national bird is such a radically different and like ultra peaceful country now.
I agree. I think about that a lot, actually.
You know, if we had been the turkey,
if we'd been the turkey country, we would be like the Canada.
Probably.
Canada would be insane.
Yeah, wandering around and just...
Yeah, like Canada we'd be flipping it, and Canada would be the crazy gun nut country, and we'd be like the peaceful, like, I don't know
everything's okay down here, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'd be the nice country.
So, the Turtle was designed by David Bushnell and was primarily used as an infiltration vehicle. Bushnell studied at Yale, and while there, he designed a remote detonatable underwater explosive. This was the origin of the whole thing. This explosive was constructed by connecting an explosive charge to a clockwork mechanism and a flintlock firing pin. And it seemed like they were really, really valuable for the war effort. But there's this gigantic question. How do you deliver these to their intended targets? So Bushnell, probably working with his neighbor, who's a clockmaker named Isaac Doolittle, and together they designed a robust diving machine. It had a foot pedal that controlled the water ballast. It had a depth gauge. It had navigation instruments and a little propeller. And the hull of the vessel was made from oak, all tied together with brass straps like a barrel. And it was a circular shape that resembled an egg or a turtle, which is why they called it the Turtle.
That's right. And in the show Turn, which is an amazing show.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about that for a while.
Brewster gets in there. Brewster's the one that gets in there.
Does he actually get in the Turtle?
I don't remember.
Oh, that's so cool.
I think he gets in the Turtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like really scary and he made it. Like, I don't know I can't remember his first name, but yeah.
Caleb,
thank you.
Caleb Brewster.
Caleb Brewster, yeah.
Yep. Now, by hand cranking a propeller, the operator could maneuver the craft through the water. And this was like a completely new design. This was insane. Nobody had come up with anything even remotely close to this. Bushnell's concept was to pilot the submarine into contact with an enemy ship, deposit his remote explosive, attach it to the hull of the British ship, and then sail away and remotely detonate the charge.
Wow.
Either damaging or hopefully sinking the ship. Incredible. Like, this kind of naval warfare has never been done before. Okay? On September 7th, 1776, Lieutenant Ezra Lee sealed himself in the submarine and piloted it through the waters of New York Harbor. Now, England had recently gained control of the harbor during the Battle of Long Island. So they had a bunch of ships stationed there. And Lee's target was the British HMS Eagle, which was a ship of the line. So that's a gigantic ship carrying 64 guns and anchored in such a way that it was blocking the waterway, so nobody could get in or out of New York Harbor. Now, the Turtle, it only had about 20 minutes of oxygen.
Ooh.
And the trip to the Eagle took about 2 hours. It's very likely that Lee was suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning by the time he arrived at her hull and began drilling a hole to secure his explosive. Due to either his exhaustion or possibly the metal plating on the hull, or maybe a combination of both, he was unable to secure the mine on her hull. Now, Lee did his best to keep the explosive near the ship, but it drifted into the East River, where it was spotted by the British aboard the ship. Lee was afraid that his submarine would fall into the wrong hands and then be used against them, so he piloted it away, and the charge ultimately detonated harmlessly in the water. Although the whole plan was really unsuccessful, it still goes down in history as being the first submarine attack on a ship.
That's so cool.
The Turtle was lost a month later when the ship transporting her was sunk in the Hudson River.
Oh no!
Yeah, so she ran one unsuccessful mission and then she sunk.
So maybe the turtle is still under the river, in the river.
I don't think they were ever able to recover the turtle. They made a replica that's in the Connecticut River Museum, but I don't think they ever recovered the actual turtle. I think it was not made of anything that could be recovered, I think.
Too wooden.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it didn't have, we can recover modern ships because their hulls are designed for like long sea travel and stuff like that. And the turtle, not so much,
Yeah, and doesn't the ocean also preserve because of all of its salt water?
Yes, it does.
So like the Hudson River, depending on where it sank,
Might
if it
not
was
have as
upriver
well,
a little
yeah.
bit more, it was,
Right.
there would be no salt water.
There's been some speculation that the whole turtle attack maybe never happened, and that it was all propaganda by the U.S. to increase morale. Richard Compton Hull, in his Submarine Pioneers, points out that the British have no record of such an attack, and that piloting across the tidal streams would have been pretty much impossible with the turtle's rudimentary propeller. Compton Hull's skepticism will come into play later, as will the complications of the turtle's construction, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Submarine warfare continued throughout the next century, with the Confederate vessel, the Hunley, becoming the first submarine to actually sink a ship. You know about the Hunley?
No.
This is a pretty famous one. Unlike her predecessor, the Turtle, the Hunley had a cylindrical iron hull, large enough for a crew of 8. Her armament consisted of a spar torpedo, which is essentially a large spear with an explosive tip, and it was intended that you would drive up or sail up and jam it into the hull of a ship. And that's exactly what she did on February 17th, 1864 in Charleston Harbor. The Union had blockaded the harbor with their sloop of war, the USS Housatonic. That night, Lieutenant George E. Dixon piloted the Hunley through the water, undetected, until it was right next to the USS Housatonic. The gunners rammed their spar torpedo into the side of the ship and detonated the explosive tip in a totally non-sexual way. Within 5 minutes, the sloop had begun to sink. And the Hunley's intention was to flee the scene, but she probably got damaged by the explosions as well, because, you're talking about it's just a harpoon, essentially.
And it wasn't timed, I guess.
No, you just jammed it into the hull and then it exploded.
Oh, that's bad planning.
So she got damaged.
Oof. Okay.
And she sank too, and all 8 of her crew members were lost.
Oh my God, that's so horrible.
Yes.
Jeez.
Despite this, it was clear that submarine warfare was viable. But the technology needed to catch up. By the turn of the 20th century, developing diesel engines and electrical power suddenly made submarines workable. And by the early 20th century, submarines were powered by electrical generators, which were in turn charged by diesel engines when the vessels cruised on the surface of the water. So the days of hand-crank propellers were over, and this was now the time of the submarine. This makes sense that they cruise along the water that charges their batteries. You hear that phrase a lot. That charges the electrical batteries. They can't run the diesel when they're on the surface, so they dive and they switch to electrical power.
Yeah, okay. That's the first time I've heard of that idea.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Do you know what the problem is running diesel on the surface? Or running diesel underneath? Why you can't run diesel underwater?
No.
Fumes will build up. Diesel fumes.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
That's why it needs to be electrical.
Okay.
So all of this brings us to World War I and the main focus of our narrative. In January of 1917, World War I was in full swing, and Britain and Germany were in a naval arms race. Britain's literal flagship was the HMS Dreadnought, a gigantic warship armed to the teeth with gun batteries. Do you know what Dreadnought means?
It means fear nothing.
Fear nothing.
I love that name. You had to say it right, though. It's the Dreadnought.
Dreadnought.
The Dreadnought. Launch the Dreadnought. Oh my God, it's so cool.
You know what's funny?
What?
So, I did not know that the Dreadnought was a real thing for a long time. I first encountered the word Dreadnought through Warhammer.
Okay.
Because they were these... the Dreadnought in Warhammer was essentially a power loader type of thing that a single guy would climb in and pilot. And I encountered those before I encountered any of these stories. And so I had like the backwards experience where then I learned about the ship and I was like, oh, that's what they based it on.
Yeah, because Warhammer is all British military guys.
Totally. Yeah.
So it's all
Yeah.
Well...
Yeah, it's based... Warhammer is based on the British... I guess they're British, the European war games, tabletop war games that they used to play, and then just made into like a fantasy or sci-fi setting.
But weren't the guys who came up with the idea of Warhammer, weren't they veterans? Or am I making that up?
I don't know if that's true.
Oh, okay. I thought they were all war people.
Slangmonsterspodcast@gmail.com. Tell me about the origin of Warhammer.
Yeah. Help us. We are confused.
So the Dreadnought was designed by John Jackie Fisher and based on his research into the Japanese Battle of Tsushima. So in that battle, the Japanese focused on heavier guns to devastate their enemy with like a hail of explosive high-rate gunfire. And Fisher's idea was to create a vessel capable of exclusively carrying the biggest guns possible, namely 10 12-inch BL Mark X's. Mark X. Across 5 different gun turrets. These were 45 caliber monsters with a range of 11 miles.
Damn.
This is such like small dick energy too. I'm just gonna say like this guy who's like we're gonna build the biggest. It's gonna have the biggest guns. It's gonna fire the biggest barrage.
I don't know. I mean, maybe. I would push back a little bit and say they were at war and they needed the best material they could get.
You might have a point there if this ship actually saw action.
Oh.
So you would think that like this ship would be such a terror and bring like Great Britain's wrath down on the German opposition, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is the HMS Dreadnought only had 1 kill during the war, and that was only from ramming and sinking a German submarine, the U-29. She never used those guns.
So the Dreadnought never did much.
Was not dreaded at all, in fact.
Aww.
The ironic thing is that Britain had developed this battleship as like an immense show of power. It was a big dick swing, right?
Yeah, sure.
And all of that made them very covetous of her because there was so much money and prestige wrapped up in this ship that they were afraid that losing her would be devastating. So the HMS Dreadnought never really engaged in combat, and in 1919 it was just decommissioned.
Wow, it's kind of like the royalty of England, where it's like they exist, there's all this money behind them, they're this figurehead, but they do nothing.
Yeah, quite a bit like that. But what the Dreadnought did do is kick off a seafaring arms race between Britain and Germany. Now we're talking Kaiser Wilhelm II and Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz. They were intimidated by the Dreadnought, whether it was sinking ships or not. And they tried to respond with their own battleships. But it very quickly became clear that they were never going to catch up or overtake Britain's superiority when it came to traditional sailing ships, or steamships. And so instead, they decided to focus on submarines. By the start of World War I, the Germans were fielding 29 submarines called undersea boats, or undersea boots.
Undersea boots?
Undersea boots.
Aw.
The German language is nothing if not efficient and incredibly literal.
It is very literal, yes.
Now, some of these U-boats would torpedo ships. Others performed covert operations like laying mines. And for a time, it was a really effective strategy, and the Germans sunk about 5,000 merchant ships, which was devastating to the Allied supply lines. The U-boats also sunk 100 warships and damaged 42 more. So initially in the conflict, they had some pretty good numbers. The Allies were forced to develop convoys, protecting their ships with naval vessels. They also launched sub-chasers. Those are like smaller ships designed for submarine warfare.
I know what those are. My
Yeah.
grandfather was on one.
Totally, right? Yeah.
And my great uncle.
These strategies proved pretty effective. And by the end of the war, the Allies had sunk 178 U-boats, which was just about half of the German fleet. Now, not all of the submarines went down fighting either. By the end of the war, they had kind of developed like a reputation of being death traps. Think about it. 50% were lost during combat. So that meant you had a 50% chance of getting sunk once you set foot on deck. It's not a real encouraging number.
Yeah, man. Back then, everything was so dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's still relatively new technology.
Yeah.
You know, like they haven't perfected it yet. They're working. And they were improving as the war went on. But they were definitely super dangerous. They were way more dangerous than being on a battleship. On April 30th, 1918, the British naval drifter Coreopsis II was sailing off the coast of Belfast. The Coreopsis was a smaller ship, built after the design of a fishing trawler, and, as such, capable of carrying a good deal of weight. And by weight, I mean guns. Around 4 a.m., this drifter sighted a German submarine on the surface about a quarter of a mile away. Cruising on the surface, as we talked about, was a requirement for any diesel-powered sub, because that was how they recharged their batteries. That may have been what this particular U-boat was doing, although the captain would tell a different story later on. Because this was the infamous UB-85, and it was about to have a very, very bad day. While the Coreopsis II was actually running scout missions, they're not about to turn down the opportunity to sink a German vessel. So she opened fire, and the UB-85 responded by crash diving below the surface. Crash diving is when you are just like, boom, all hands below, we're going down now, immediately. So cries of "Fluten" echoed through the tiny cabins on the sub as Captain Lieutenant Gunther Kresch ordered the engineers to flood the tanks. Fill the tanks with water so the boat is no longer buoyant, it can sink.
Fluten.
Fluten, that's what they would say. Fluten, fluten. The boat dove bow first into the water, while the crew switched their diesel engines to electrical power to keep them moving. She made it to a depth of 20 meters before something went catastrophically wrong. Thinking their quarry had been lost, the Coreopsis was about to give up hope when the submarine unexpectedly resurfaced. But she didn't fire on the drifter. She just floated to the surface like a wounded animal. The Coreopsis engaged again, and Captain Lieutenant Kresch and his crew fled the ship as she sunk beneath the waves and disappeared. The Coreopsis took the Germans as prisoners, and they were surprised by how easy this victory was. Like, the sub didn't even fight back. Once aboard and dry, Captain Lieutenant Kresch explained their quick surrender in what would become a legendary tale of sea monster folklore. According to Kresch, while the crew was recharging the sub's batteries, they had been attacked by a monster. As reported on unmuseum.org, the captain said this: The beast had large eyes set in a horny kind of skull. It had a small head, but with teeth that could be seen glistening in the moonlight. Every man on watch began firing a sidearm at the beast. According to his account, the monster was so massive that it made the U-boat almost tip on one side. It clamped down on the forward gun mount with its huge jaws as if it was trying to tear the boat apart. This is like fucking out of Godzilla, right?
Yeah, really.
Finally, the crew's efforts firing and smacking it with paddles and shit just drove the monster to release its hold and sink below the surface. But the damage it caused was catastrophic. That was when the Coreopsis arrived on the scene and started firing at them. Already panicked, the crew attempted the crash dive, but as cold water poured in through the damaged hatch, Kresh realized that he had no choice but to surface and surrender, and probably sacrifice the ship in the process. The UB-85 was a lost cause, destroyed not by Allied fire, but by a monster from the depths of the ocean.
So, and then it sank, so we don't really have a chance to look at it and post-mortem this thing.
We don't.
Do you think that he said that to save face for surrendering?
I will reserve that judgment until the next episode.
Okay. All right.
Well, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
The Coreopsis' crew hadn't seen the creature, and the submarine was lost, sunk. All they had to go on was the captain's story, and the frightened 34 men who survived on the submarine. All of them were taken as prisoners, and their wild account was logged as nothing but a strange tale. And what's mind-boggling is that the sinking of the UB-85, that wasn't the first time a German submarine had fallen victim to a sea monster. But we'll talk about that encounter and the truth behind Captain Lieutenant Kresh's account in our next episode.
Ooh, okay. The truth.
Yeah.
Broad in the beam.
Okay.
To be broad in the beam describes the width of the beam or mast, usually on a ship of good size. It became a slang term to describe a person wide across the hips and back end. Oh, wow.
Broad in the beam. I've never heard
broad
that
in the beam.
before. Interesting.
Never heard that before. Huh.
The beam is the distance across the deck, I believe. Right?
Well, broad in the beam describes the width of the beam or mast, usually on a ship of good size. Dude, I don't know. Do I look like a sailor to you?
Yes.
Do I look like a seaman?
Yeah, measuring a ship at its widest point is the beam.
Okay. Showing one's true colors? Hoisting flags to designate the origin of a ship?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did not know this.
Look at all the things we're learning.
All the things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Grammarist.com.
Grammarist.com, not a sponsor of this podcast.
No. It's giving me some really weird ads, though. Like, showing me, like, old men with no shirts on and how you can, like, work out when you're sitting in a chair. How long does it take to get toned body with chair yoga, according to my age? And then there's also a spam ad. This is America, guys. This is because we chose not to go with the turkey.
Should have gone with the turkey.
Should have gone with the turkey. Now we're getting ads about spam and chair yoga. The world is ending. It's ending. All right. Interesting. Okay. That's really cool.
So there you go.
I have my thoughts.
Ooh. Do you want to share your thoughts now? Or do you want to wait?
I think it's just completely to save face.
Okay.
Because it's more dangerous to show weakness in the middle of a war than it is to...
Absolutely. Yeah.
to
Yeah,
not.
absolutely. But no matter what, though, they still just surrendered.
Yeah, they
didn't fight back. So you think that they just willingly surrendered? Okay.
I think they willingly surrendered instead of fighting back because they didn't want to fight. They were tired and they wanted to stop.
I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
And
war is not a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, whether they all agreed with the captain or not, that's what the captain did, and that's my story. Now that's probably a shameful thing to come up, to say, but I'm just saying, like, I think that's more likely than a sea monster. That's all.
It's very in keeping with Godzilla -1, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Well, isn't it? You know, at the beginning, he doesn't shoot Godzilla.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And he was the kamikaze pilot that came back.
Yeah, he chose not to.
Yeah.
And because he said his ship was malfunctioning or something.
His plane was malfunctioning.
His plane was malfunctioning.
Yeah.
God, such a good movie.
Oh, it's great.
But that's the thing, man. Like, I guess I would be terrible at war because I'm like, just freaking save yourself. Like, however you can save yourself.
Well, and
if you have to say the sea monster attacked your ship, do it.
Wasn't that Dan Carlin? I think it was Dan Carlin who talked about how most people would just like drop their guns and not fight.
Yeah.
I think it was Dan Carlin who said that.
I think he said that. I think it might have been World War I or II.
I think it was World War One. Yeah. That it was just, everything was so horrible that they would just fight, put down their guns during the fight and not participate at all.
Yeah, because it actually wasn't even, yes, you were shooting, but you had bayonets too. So you had to stab other people and look them in the eyes while you did it. Right. And these people were they were ordinary people assigned to war.
Yeah.
And same with like fucking the Civil War. Like, totally. Anytime you have that close combat fighting and you are not raised in a society that is just to kill. You are not a Spartan. You are not a samurai. Like, you are not, you know what I mean? You are a regular fucking person brought to war. This is not in your, it's not who you are.
Right. Yeah, we're watching Shogun now,
man, so
which is
good.
very much that mentality of like, well, you know, death is around us all the time. We are here to die.
Oh yeah, to serve.
What is it? You live, you die, and you have no control
over anything else.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But if you're not raised with that mentality, the act of taking another person's life is really, really a hard thing for you to mentally process. And that's why, so many people just wouldn't fight.
Yeah. I think I'd be that person. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like sometimes like, oh yeah, I'd be so brave, you know. I'd be like, but you know what? Like, you have to, I don't know.
The act of doing it, I think, is too much.
Yeah.
You know.
I think I'd try to live and I would try to save other people, but I wouldn't want to kill. I think I'd just walk around trying to save people and maybe try not to die.
I think that's very respectable.
Thank you.
So anyway, before it gets too dark over here.
it's I don't know, makes you think.
It's
I don't
war.
know.
No, I know, it's war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a dark day though, so I think it calls for it. It's been raining nonstop.
Yeah.
It's a good day for ducks.
Nice weather for ducks.
Nice weather for ducks.
Okay. We're running away here.
Oh my god.
Cool. So yeah, next time we're going to talk about the other incident, and we're going to talk about some of the more recent uncoveries that have happened with all of this. They think they might have found one of the submarines, which is pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
And so we'll talk about that and what that may or may not reveal about what actually happened.
Very cool.
Stick around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I guess that's all we got.
Yeah.
You landlubbers.
That's right.
You salty dogs.
Salty dog, I always loved.
Yeah.
The old sea dog.
Y'all sea dogs.
Arg.
Arg. All right, get out of here and enjoy your grog, mateys.
Until the next time.
Until the next time.
Sail around.
Thanks for listening.
Be safe out there. Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters. If you like the podcast and what we do, please share it with others or leave us a rating and review. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.